Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Take Charge for December of 2015. This is our last session for this series. So our topic today, we're going to be talking about nutritional trends, I guess, is probably the best way to take a look at it. We're all familiar with the on-again, off-again debates and trends and things like that that we hear about food and nutrition. You know, it seems like one day butter's good, the next day butter's bad. One day carbohydrates are good, the next day carbohydrates are bad. Coffee's great for you, coffee's horrible. I like the coffee's great for you side, I won't lie to you. So today we're going to have a wonderful opportunity. We have two speakers that are going to be joining us this evening. Our first speaker is Dr. Paul O, and we've all heard Dr. O speak before. Dr. O is our medical director here for our cardiac rehab program. He's going to be talking, and he's going to be joined today by dietitian Samantha Thiessen. Did I say that right? Thiessen, no H in that. Okay. So Samantha is a registered dietitian. She works at Halton Healthcare, in Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital. And she also teaches part-time at Ryerson University, where it's kind of interesting. She takes foreign trained dietitians and get them ready to practice here in Canada. So she's going to be talking with Dr. O as well. So we're going to have an interesting perspective from the nutritional side and then also from Dr. O's on the medical side. So those are our speakers. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Rob, and welcome to everyone. This is a great opportunity for us. It's actually for me because I've come here to learn just like you have. So I won't tell you anything of substance, but I get to be the setup person. It's like the baseball analogy. I'll set it up, and we have a wonderful cleanup hitter who's going to keep hitting home runs as we walk along through this. But we love this opportunity to have this interaction. The format will be, or the major objectives for us will be to address some of the common topics in nutrition that we're all very much aware of. What are the controversies or ideas or new topics? They're related to the mainstays of food today. You know, what about sugar? What about fat? What about salt? How about the headlines, as Rob has alluded to, around what's in the media recently? And indeed, that's actually the inspiration for the topics that we've selected. What's hot in a news article that came out in 2015? And then we get to ask the expert, what's the real thing about this headline? Is there any substance? Is there reality? Is there a kernel of truth to it? The other important part is not just about individual nutrients, and that's what I've learned from dietitians. And every time I hear from a dietitian, I always learn a great deal. But rather, it's how we put food together. It's not about any one thing. There is no superfood that's going to change us, but it's rather how we package it together. And then for fun, we thought we'd throw in something interesting, like a headline about coffee. And we hope that we'll be able to turn some of this stuff into a meaningful and something practical for you to take away as you embark on the holidays. Sam, any intro comments from you?
Yeah, definitely. This is something that's hot. I mean, every day I see people and I get bombarded with questions about, so is butter good again? And gets really confusing. So hopefully between the dialogue back and forth, we can sort of help dispel some of your questions and some of the myths that are propagated out there and get something new out of it.
Terrific. So I've got about 28 slides set up different topics, like 5 different topics, but then there'll be lots of time for kind of open question and answer. So if we don't cover the topic that's a burning interest to you, then hold on to that question and we'll pose that during an open period. Or if you want to do this one-on-one, we can also do that, okay? All right, you're all in the right room? Let's carry on then. Okay, so jumping right into it. Let's start. Is anybody thinking about having some sugar over the next couple of weeks? Who's got shortbread? Who's got hot chocolate? Who's got wonderful treats like that? What does the Heart and Stroke say about added sugar? Let's visit kind of a couple headlines from the Heart and Stroke Foundation. What does it really mean, this notion of added sugar? Because I guess every sugar is added, right, in some fashion. Is there such a thing as an adequate intake of sugar? Do I need a certain amount? Is there too much sugar, perhaps? And is sugar actually the bad thing for the heart? It used to be fat was the bad thing. Is maybe sugar the bad thing now? So let's ask some of those questions if that's okay with you. And the inspiration is drawn from things like this. So if you visit the Heart and Stroke website, it's a gentleman in the audience say it's hard for you to read what's on the board, and we appreciate that. If we turn down the lights, I understand it's probably hard for our camera friends to actually see us. So how about that? Can you see that any better? If not, I'll just do my best to convey what's written on the screen. So one headline that I've drawn from the Heart and Stroke kind of guidance for us. So just pay attention to this if it's hard to read. It says that people that eat a lot of sugar, like at least about 10% of all the calories that you eat, if that's sugar, between 10 and 25%, gosh, there's 25% of us, of all the calories we eat, some people eat 25% of that in sugar. That's a lot of sugar, my goodness. And you would think, well, maybe that's not such the healthiest diet plan. And indeed, what the Heart and Stroke will quote is that people who have a lot of sugar in their diet, the risk of having a heart problem is probably 30% higher than people that don't have a lot of sugar. That's the suggestion from the background. And if you have even more of your diet from sugar, like over a quarter, if over a quarter of your calories comes from sugar, so if I only drink juice and soda pops all day long, and that's my main source of calories, gosh, my risk of dying from heart disease goes up triple. So this is probably a bad thing that's going to happen to me. The other inspiration for this comes from studies like this. And I don't know if any of you saw a headline like this that says, sugar is linked to heart disease and even to high blood pressure, is a suggestion from one particular study. Now, we know it's a tough time out there when you're looking at internet or at headlines, or you watch a news channel and something scrolls across the bottom of the screen really quickly. Every day something is dangerous. If you paid attention to every headline, you wouldn't eat a single thing, because everything might do you in. But here is one. And then they even made it a little bit more kind of interesting, because they said, does replacing the sugar in the diets of obese children with starchy foods like pizza and chips, does that make them healthier? And inherently you would say, well, that's a crazy idea. Of course that's no. But man, I could show you a study. Let me show you a study. How's that? And then we'll hear from the expert. So there's this investigator named Dr. Lustig, who's kind of prominent in the obesity world.
I'd say infamous.
Infamous, okay. Famous, infamous.
Yes.
He's got a certain reputation
He
for
does.
doing certain kinds of studies.
Yep.
And in this study that leads to that headline, they found 43 children, in California particularly. And we know that in some states, not California especially, but some states there is a large amount of overweight and obesity, and we know that that's affecting children as well. Their idea was that, gosh, if they look at a number of kids that are not eating so well, and in fact having too much sugar regularly in their diet, and I don't know if you know children or grandkids that might live off of sweet things. That's how they get up and go and run around until they fall down, and then they get up and go again. Well, what if we had those kids in our hands and replace that simple sugar with things that are a little bit more complex? And in particular, this full thing, I think, translates to, what if I take simple sugar and replace it with fruits or bagels or cereal or pasta or bread? So that's the notion of, can I take sugar and make it into pizza? Not exactly. Without really changing the calorie counts, will that make them healthier? So take away sugar, give them other kinds of calories that are a little bit more wholesome. Will that make them healthier? And what Dr. Lustig kind of said in the media, in the news, was, gosh, it was magical. Within 10 days, they saw blood pressure go down by 5 points. Bad cholesterol go down almost 50%. The kids' ability to handle sugar and bring up insulin was improved dramatically. And within a week, gosh, they almost lost 2 pounds as well. It seems magical. And that's what the headline was about. Oops, we're stuck. So, is sugar really a fiend? Is sugar really doing a bad thing? And can we actually make strides in health by doing these simple things? Sam?
Well, I think what you want to start with is starting with the definition of added sugar, because I think that's where the confusion starts, because we have sugar, but then we hear about fruit juice and we hear about candy bars. Are they the same thing? And I think what you want to do is you want to look at defining added sugar as something that is actually added into a food, right? So when we think about things like fruit and milk and 100% fruit juice and things like that, we don't consider those added sugars. They're naturally occurring sugars. They might be called intrinsic sugars, but they have so many other nutrients and wholesome things part of it that we don't consider those the real worry when it comes to this sugar question. So when you look at the added sugar, we're really referring to something like a food where the food manufacturer has added sugar to something, or where you're yourself adding sugar to make it taste better or sweeter or whatever. And so the problem we have is in Canada, we have this wonderful group called Health Canada that helps provide scientific and evidence-based guidelines in which we can sort of work and provide people with information. And right now, for sugar, we don't have guidelines, really specific guidelines. So we can look at something like the Heart and Stroke Foundation, the World Health Organization has something, the American Heart Association has guidelines. They're all relatively similar, where they're looking at sort of percentages of your calories. But quite frankly, most of the people I talk to, they don't even know how many calories they eat in a day. And as a dietitian, I don't encourage people to count calories because that's not necessarily realistic for most of us. So figuring out your percentage of sugar from your total calories may not be a realistic way to do it. Now, the American Heart Association takes a slightly different tack when they use teaspoons. And sometimes that's easier because it feels a bit more tangible for some people when you think in teaspoons as opposed to percentages. And so the rough guideline they're saying is about 6 teaspoons a day for women and 9 for men. And when you think that there's about 10 to 11 teaspoons in a can of cola, that's kind of, you're done for the day, right? And so that can be pretty difficult for someone who maybe enjoys pop more regularly. And so I'm not saying I'm gonna go on the record and say, enjoy your pop, but certainly it's individual. So when I meet with people one-on-one, I'm looking at what are your habits right now, and can we work on, slowly, gradually cutting it down. And I think what is too much? That's a really hard question to answer. You know why? Because we don't actually have numbers that can quantify specifically this is your max. So at this level, you're going to have this much heart disease, or the percentage is this high. And we can certainly see that the higher the intake, we tend to be less healthy. But if you think about your overall diet, not just in a meal or in a day, but like overall, generally how you eat, if you're having a large amount of sugar in your diet, when I say sugar, I'm specifying added sugar, you're probably displacing other foods in your diet that are really healthy for you, like vegetables, for example, or maybe fruit, or maybe other foods that tend to be higher in fiber, which we know, and their evidence is very strong to support that these things should be eaten in higher amounts. And so that's really where you can take this sugar thing and say, bigger picture stuff. And so you can maybe look in your own diet and say, what kind of things might I be eating mindlessly perhaps, and you don't even really think about it. So think of these, people think granola bars are really healthy, right? Because they have fiber and they have oats and they have pretty nuts and seeds in it and they look great. But if you look at the label on it, you'll see that they're fairly high in sugar in a lot of cases. Next example, and I call these health halos, right? So you look at a food and it seems really like the packaging's all green and healthy looking and you think this is good for me. You know what the next one is? Yogurt. So yogurt seems to have this, like you walk in the grocery store, the yogurt aisle is giant, right? It's a wall of different yogurt. How on earth are you supposed to determine this? Well, a lot of the flavored yogurts have quite a lot of added sugar. There's some naturally occurring, but then there's also added sugar. And so it's trying to find a bit of a balance between, picking foods in your diet a little bit more that have less of that added sugar in it. Okay? So I don't know if there's anything more I can talk about. Maybe we can pull on more of that later.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Sam. So too much is probably not a good idea. Having kids run around eating sugar all day long is probably not a good idea.
Right.
Maybe it's bad for your health, but we're really not so sure about kind of the harms or the benefits at this point.
Indeed.
We'll take Rob. Do you usually take questions through this? Is that a useful format for this kind of thing?
Absolutely. People have some questions that are relevant for sure.
Okay. Why don't we take 3 and then we'll move to the next topic? Mr. Kennedy, sir.
One question, how do I tell if it's added sugar or just natural sugar in the grocery store?
Excellent question.
Is there
Okay, we'll repeat the question as well.
Yeah. So the question was whether or not how you can tell if there's added sugar or if it's already naturally occurring sugar in a food item when you're in the grocery store. And you know what? You're right. It's really difficult to tell right now with our labeling guidelines the way they are. Unless you have a very large knowledge about, sugar in foods, it can be really challenging. The good news is the government has looked into revamping our food labels, and so what they're going to do once it gets unrolled, maybe you could talk to Justin Trudeau about, speeding this up, but right now they're talking about having sugar, as it usually says, but indented underneath they're going to specify amount of added sugar. And so, but that's to come, so it doesn't really help you right now, but recognizing there is a certain amount of naturally occurring sugars in things like milk products, so yogurt and fluid milk, a little bit in cheese, not too much, things like that. And then obviously fruits, not a lot in vegetables, and not very much in things like grains, and very little in meats and proteins. And so those are really the big ones. Yeah, fruit juices.
Take a question here, sir.
Are you including all sugars? Like, that's processed sugar. What about the natural sugars, and what about the alternatives, which apparently fool your body, and
Yeah.
you can get diabetes even though you're having non-sugar sweeteners?
Well, that's a whole other
Yeah,
presentation,
yeah.
really. But let's see if we can address the best we can. So you were asking about,
Processed
the
versus
processed sugar versus. Okay, so when we think about processed sugar, all sugar, if you want to really get down to the brass tacks here, is processed. That's because all sugar comes from some kind of plant form, either sugar beet or sugar cane, or you could look at, these alternative sugars like stevia and agave. They're all processed. They all come from plants. So I think a lot of people see little stevia leaf on a yogurt and you feel maybe a little bit better about it because it comes from a plant, but they're all highly processed to get them down to the granular form or a syrup form. And quite frankly, when it goes through your body, they all go through a very similar sort of biological pathway in your body, and your body treats it as, and will break it down to the simplest form of sugar, which is glucose. And so that's what we're really seeing. So it's not so much about the different types. I have someone who says, I don't put sugar in my coffee, I use maple syrup. And I said, okay, so if you want to do that for flavor, super duper, great. But really, there's not too much of a difference in the amount of actual sugar you're consuming. It's not like it's necessarily a healthier sugar. And so the whole raw sugar versus processed sugar, it's a difficult one to sort of see. I haven't seen certainly anything, and perhaps you have, but in terms of better health outcomes for people who consume this, it may be that people who use less, I guess what you could call processed sugar or white sugar, may be more mindful about other choices they're making in their diet, and in that case you may see health benefits, right? Because maybe you're thinking a little bit more about, I shouldn't put too much in my coffee, or maybe I'll have high fiber, bread instead of something else. And so those kinds of choices are usually overall, in the long run, what going to give you better results. Yeah.
Okay, great. We'll take one more. Lee?
Does honey get processed in the body the same way as sugar would?
Yes.
Same way.
Yeah, I know. It tastes great though.
Yeah. The question was, is honey
Sorry,
processed the same way as white sugar? And the answer is, so if it's sweet and delicious, then it's sweet and delicious and have the right amount.
Yeah.
Not too much, not too little, but just right.
Yeah, all sugar is natural.
Sugar.
It's all yeah, it really is. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the
sugar
bees
cane.
did most of the work for you. So I guess the bees are the processing plant for your honey. But yeah, it's sort of like brown sugar. Someone thought it was healthier because it was brown. And I said, well, it's white sugar, as you see on the screen, plus molasses, right? And molasses does have some nutritional benefits, but not if you're having a whole heck of a lot of it. So
Okay.
back to the Mac.
Terrific. Well, thank you. That's the sugar section. If you've got more sugar questions, hold on to them. We'll have an open section later on.
Yeah.
I suspect you'll be here till 10 o'clock tonight, so that's great. So here's some other tips from the heart and stroke that I think Samantha's already chatted about as well. So I think one theme that we're going to present is that if you're using fresh foods, you're on a pretty good place to start, aren't we?
Indeed, yeah.
Indeed. So if it's not in the can or the box, and it's kind of leafy and it's in the produce section, then we're doing well. Think about reducing the amount of sugar that you can visibly add when you're preparing in foods and recipes. Sugar-loaded beverages. I guess that's something that we can probably all agree on, that those are indeed the empty calories. They're probably not giving us much of anything except sugar.
Right.
And
And certainly the studies that look at, sugar intake seem to use sugary beverages as sort of a calculating point to determine risk level. And so we can say with a fair amount of certainty that things like soft drinks and energy drinks and sports drinks and stuff like that, are significant in their impact in our health generally, yeah.
And I guess if there's one thing that we take away, and it's always useful to see if there's one thing that you might take away from any session, and it might be back to the good old water. You're thirsty, drink a water. There we go. Okay, switch gears. Let's talk about fat. And here's some of the questions that we were posing to Samantha before we got here. Do we need to be concerned about fat and cholesterol? And our friend in the front row already posed this question. We think there is a myth that was born over the last number of decades about fat. And fat's not so bad. Bacon, long live sausage, yeah? Should we have a rallying cry about that? What about those eggs? Have they been vilified? Have they been deviled in some way? Oh my gosh. Oh, that's a bad one. What about processed meats? There's lots of messaging. Cholesterol, good or bad? Rob's already brought them up. How do we eat well with this? So what's the headline? Drawn from no less than the New York Times. And the New York Times early in 2015 was reporting on the new American nutrition panel that said, indeed, just like we were talking about, well, let's just have less sugar. And cholesterol and fat that we used to beat up on, maybe it's not so bad. And indeed, having Americans think about restricting cholesterol from eggs and shrimp, well, maybe that's just old research that wasn't done really, really well, and that really doesn't have a big role to play in kind of more modern thinking. And that's what they said, which of course leads people to run around saying, let's go get some bacon to have with our maple syrup flavored coffee. That's really great. So is there something in the guidelines, was there something in the studies that they actually pointed to as real kind of medical literature that was interpreted in that way? So one of the articles that New York Times cited was this thing that was published in the American Journal of Cardiology, saying that dietary cholesterol, quote, dietary cholesterol is likely not a major contributor to coronary risk factors or to cardiovascular events. But there is something about eggs, especially in people that process eggs in a certain way, to dietary cholesterol. So there was a subtext about this, about eggs. And they looked carefully at what's going on with eggs in a number of very large studies across the world, where they looked at the egg consumption in populations. And if they divided the population into people that had a lot of eggs, high egg users, that's at least one a day. Is anybody a one-a-day egg user? A few of you will admit to that. There are probably others that won't admit to that because you're in the heart program. Versus low egg users, that is, you had less than one a week, or you never had an egg. Are there any of those folks in the room? There's more no egg users than there are heavy egg users, at least what you'll admit to. But what the research that they quoted would suggest is, it doesn't matter if you eat a whole bunch of eggs or no eggs. The risk for most people is the same in terms of heart disease. Again, this is what they say in the literature. But there was this interesting thing they saw when they looked at these papers, and they said people that had a lot of eggs, it seemed to elevate the risk of developing diabetes by about 42%. And if you had diabetes and you ate a lot of eggs, boy, that really raised your risk of having a bad heart problem. So, complex issue. The New York Times simply said, cholesterol, don't worry about it, eat what you want. Sugar's the bad thing. The underlying studies, rather more complex. So, Sam, do we need to be concerned about cholesterol, saturated fat? What is the deal about eggs, and how do we make sense of this?
Well, okay, these are a lot of topics.
Wow.
A lot of topics, okay. So let's start with the cholesterol one, because I think a lot of people that I talk to want to know whether or not eggs are okay again. We can go back as far as 1918, and this was the original study done by a Russian researcher where he fed pure cholesterol to rabbits and found they had higher rates of heart disease. And this is really what started the ball rolling with people really worried about dietary cholesterol. And I think it's really important to sort of define dietary cholesterol and then the cholesterol in our body, which are two very distinct things. And so what we're starting to learn, and a lot of, the American guidelines just starting to modify some of their guidelines and some of their messaging really shows that the science hasn't been able to continually prove that the dietary cholesterol, such as the stuff we find in eggs and in shrimp and things like that, aren't directly responsible for increases in, say, your lousy LDL cholesterol. The thing we still look at is the saturated fat component, but the saturated fat is another complex issue. Okay, so saturated fat for a long time has been deemed enemy number one when it comes to heart disease. But what we're recognizing, and some of this came out with the coconut oil thing, I'm not going to get into it, I promise, because that's a whole other presentation.
Save that for the question period.
But
yeah.
we recognize that saturated fats come from different sources. And when we look at the sources they come from, that seems to be the impact that we see most significant on things like your blood cholesterol levels. So if we look at saturated fat that come from animal sources, so think of things like marbled meats, sausages on the screen, your
Delicious.
bacon, yes, all of these things, these tend to still show a slight increase in LDL cholesterol. That's that lousy bad cholesterol. And we're still seeing that. But in plant-based saturated fats, we tend not to see the same rise. And so that's the significance thing. I'm jumping around. I'm just realizing that I'm jumping around. So the egg, let's go back to the eggs, because I want to stay on track and answer all your questions. So the egg thing, right now, there are no good guidelines for eggs. I said that about sugar too, didn't I? Sorry.
No good guidelines.
Yeah, and I say this a lot to my students. It depends. And they get sick of hearing that too, because it really depends on you. So if you're a heart patient, you're vegetarian, you don't have a lot of, you're not including animal sources of protein in your diet, then your egg amount might be slightly higher than someone who is omnivorous. They're eating a little bit of everything, including animal proteins in their diet. And you might want to just limit the number of eggs until we have more information. So for people, so non-heart patients, so no heart disease, the guideline is up to an egg a day. In our heart patients, in the people that I see in our program, it's generally ranges from about 2 to 4 whole eggs a week. That's visible eggs, and so that would be if someone made a batch of muffins and have an egg in it, you don't have to count 1/12 of an egg and a dozen muffins or anything that specific, but if you were to crack a bunch of eggs and make an omelet, you may count that. Here's how I look at it. Quantifying nutrition is really difficult to do, so I average it. So if 1 week you're eating 2 eggs, another week you're eating 0 eggs, another week you're eating 5 eggs, average it out for the month. How am I doing? Am I still in that range more or less? What am I including with the eggs when I'm eating it? Is it a lot of, processed and higher fat meats like bacon and sausages and things like that? Or is it things like whole wheat toast and, tomatoes and fruit and things like that? See the difference there? So we're not trying to focus so much on the nutrient on the food, but looking at sort of the meal itself and how does that play out. And so hopefully that helps address some of the egg issues. Dairy and processed meats. I think with the processed meat part of it, I just blogged about this not too long ago because so many people were asking me questions like, oh no, I have to give up bacon. Oh, I shouldn't. One of my friends said, I can't give my son bacon anymore because I read it's really bad. And well, the headlines are really sensational, aren't they? And they're a little bit scary sometimes too. You're not really sure what to think. So it's about moderation. I know you've heard this before from the dietitians, and you're going to hear it again because this is what we know, the best thing that works, right? So if you really love bacon, you can have a little bit of bacon, just not every weekend maybe, or maybe not in very large amounts. But if you don't really love bacon and it's not a big deal to you, then keeping it out of your diet is probably less of an issue. But if you feel deprived by not having this wonderful, magical bacon food, then include it sometimes so you don't have those, really strong cravings for it, or feeling a bit grumpy about how you're eating because you feel like you can't have all your favorites. Okay?
That's great.
That kind of
Gosh,
cover it mostly?
I'm feeling a little dispirited about the classic Canadian breakfast. We're beating up big time, and we just wait till what's coming up next.
Yeah.
We'll take 3 questions around fats, and we'll go to this side, please.
Okay, this is his infamous coconut oil.
Oh, you're gonna get no matter what. Okay.
And I
Do it.
have, my background is, I'm a healthcare clinician, and I have talked to registered dietitians and nutritionists and UHN and Trillium Healthcare, and actually right across the country. And nobody seems to come up with a definitive answer
Okay.
for anybody who is heart and diabetic, when you combine the two that actually do go together. So I've now heard, as of this morning, that somebody in Vancouver General, that it's 1/8 the molecule from being a palm oil, which obviously is not good for a heart patient. So is there something definitive that you can?
So I guess I just want to make sure I understand the question. So are you asking about sort of the benefits of coconut oil for heart
Everybody
patients, or?
is changing all the recipes to coconut oil and quinoa, working in them together. But let's talk about coconut.
Don't forget the
on,
kale.
on a bed of kale.
Yes, I was gonna say.
Kale,
Kale, quinoa,
quinoa.
a little coconut oil.
Yeah, delicious.
Superfood.
It's the whole issue about
Bacon.
don't cook with any other oils, only coconut
Right,
oil.
right.
And bake with only coconut oil.
So I'm hearing a lot of, whether or not coconut oil is really considered this sort of magical superfood that can sort of change your health. Yeah, and I've done a lot of research on coconut oil because the research is emerging slowly just because it's getting really hot and trendy, and so there's a little bit more money in this, interestingly. So what do we know about coconut oil? So it's a plant-based, high in saturated fat type of fat. And this used to worry people to no end because foods that are really high in saturated fat equaled heart disease, right? That was the worry. When I talked about saturated fat earlier, we talked about it depends what the source is, right? So if we look at plant-based source saturated fats, it doesn't seem to have the same negative impact on those, blood levels of LDL and things like that than we originally thought. Here's the catch, right? So there's no superfood. I'm sorry. I wish I could be the one to say it, right? Yeah, coconut oil. But I can't. What we know about coconut oil is if someone were to use it as a primary cooking oil, it does show a small increase in LDL. That's the lousy one, right? It also increases the good cholesterol at HDL, which is not a bad thing. But it also showed that in some cases it raised those blood fats, those triglycerides also. When they compared coconut oil with things like olive and canola oil, the olive and canola oil seemed to have better results. So olive oil and canola oil don't raise LDL to the same extent as coconut oil, but they both raised HDL, the good stuff, similarly. And canola and olive didn't raise triglycerides, those blood fats, like coconut oil did. So the basic guideline, guys, the bottom line I say for coconut oil is don't have to sort of go out of your way to make it your primary oil every day. There certainly isn't enough evidence to say this is sort of the new food for 2016 or anything, but I think it adds a really lovely layer of flavors in a stir fry, for example. But if you want to do really, for main cooking, I still go with olive oil and canola oil. There are a lot more studies that still back that up and still show far better results from a heart disease point of view for those guys. So that's sort of where I stand there. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. Jim?
Just a quick add-on to the end of that. What about like canola and we have olive? What about grapeseed oil?
Oh goodness. Yeah. I mean, grapeseed oil still has a lot of wonderful, benefits and components, and it's still considered, a plant-based oil, so it's still a wonderful oil to use. I think some people find the flavor not as neutral, as, canola is very mild, and olive, if you like, it's a little fruitier, but grapeseed, some people don't enjoy the flavor. It's a little bit cost prohibitive for some people because it's fairly expensive, but yeah, the benefits are still, evident there. Yeah, you're good there.
Now, my real question, you were talking about all of this guy that said he fed bunnies cholesterol,
Yes.
right? Okay, bunnies don't normally eat cholesterol,
No.
okay? So bunnies don't eat that stuff, so that's like, there's something wrong with the science here.
Well, and that's
the
what
other
we've
thing
learned.
that I wanted to
Yeah.
just to wonder about was, well, we had this thing about, like, if somebody eats an egg and we say, well, the daily limit for your cholesterol per day is supposed to be 300. Well, that's what an egg is.
Right.
And then we go along and say, well, you shouldn't eat any more than that. And everybody says, well, I eat a half an egg a day anyway, but that's the only animal protein I eat.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's very individual to look at people's cholesterol needs. And so we generally, when I speak with people, I don't speak to people about cholesterol guidelines. Dietitians of Canada basically tossed out that position paper quite a while ago because the evidence didn't stack up.
But the evidence, all of these things, did anybody actually sit down and say, okay, we're going to check out how many people eat an egg a day? How many have steak for lunch every day and dinner? And how many of them have sausage and Nevada with the rigs? I mean, was there any separation of there was only egg, or was the science kind of crappy? And we're just going to say, we're going to ask how many people had eggs and not bother to find out that somebody else ate a cow along with the egg.
Well, I think the beauty of nutritional science is there's a whole lot of variables you have to control for in a lot of these studies. So in a lot of cases, what they do is if they're looking at the number of eggs people are eating, they're looking at, a food frequency questionnaire, which is going to give them information and data on other things in their diet, and they would control for that when they come up with their final results and conclusions and stuff. So
Great. So I
Okay.
think we're raising the complexities of looking at this
Absolutely.
information and the contrast to what's in a news headline versus what might be underneath there. And I think what we're seeing is that there's many layers there. Okay. One more question at the back, and then we'll move to our next topic. Sir.
You answered it, but when I use olive oil to fry, I agree that it doesn't hold its value as it's just out, but it's still good to use for frying.
Yeah, it's a question that's been going on. I still am sorry. The question was about whether olive oil breaks down when you're cooking it, and whether you lose some value in some of the health benefits you derive from it. And I think this is a question that doesn't have an easy answer yet again. What we know is there are various types of olive oils. So if you look at something like extra virgin olive oil, which is essentially the very first pressing of the olives after they're picked off those trees in southern Italy. Oh, I'm getting kind of, sounds nice.
Love it.
And those are the most volatile type of oil, right? So when you use it in cooking, it will break down a little bit more quickly and be more apt to oxidize, which is where you might see nutrient loss. So generally, when we talk about extra virgin olive oil, we reserve that for something like salad dressings, for dipping your fancy bread in, and things like that. The regular olive oils you see in the grocery stores are usually subsequent pressings of the olives, and so that usually means they're not quite as volatile, and you can see by the color change that it's usually for medium heat cooking, it's okay. For high heat cooking like searing, stir frying, canola oil is a really good option. It's got a much higher smoke point, and so that's where you can usually get away with very little change in sort of the chemical molecule of it.
Potatoes, French fries,
What? Potatoes and French fries?
Yeah, don't cook your bacon in olive oil. That's what I heard. Moving on to our third topic, speaking of delicious bacon and sodium. Is there anything new in terms of sodium? And if we think specifically about people who might be living well with heart failure and sodium, and where does sodium hide apart from the salt shaker? Because often the salt shaker is not the place where we often think about. And once again, let's go back to the New York Times from last January that had this tantalizing headline. A new study suggests that dietary salt may have little or no effect on the risk for heart disease in older adults. This is another one where everything we've been told is out the window now, Jimmy. What's going on here? So what was this study about? So in this particular study called the Health ABC, 2,600 older adults, their word, not mine, 71 years young up to 80 years young, were brought into this study. They completed this survey tool that Samantha's introduced called a food frequency questionnaire. How many cows do they eat? How many eggs do they eat? How much salt can be derived from those questions? And then over the next 10 years, it was looked at how many people died, had a heart problem, or heart failure during those 10 years. Okay, you're with me? 2,600 older people, let's see what happens, and relate it to the things that they ate, and in particular, the amount of sodium that was in their diet. What do you think would have happened if we believed all the things that we told you? If you ate a lot of salt, what should happen? You'd probably die, okay. And if you ate a little bit of salt, you would probably live. So here's what they found, which was tantalizing, that over a period of 10 years, and that's what's shown on this x-axis, 10 years, and this is survival. So over those 10 years, unfortunately, about 30% of the population died. But then if you look at these different lines, the blue line represents people that had less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium. So that's pretty low sodium in their diet. 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams, which is reasonable, meeting the guideline kind of sodium.
Yep.
And then there's people that had 2,300 milligrams of sodium, which is this darker line here. So they had the most sodium of all. And really, these lines kind of superimpose, which says, at least on this crude measure, you really couldn't figure out what's good or bad with respect to sodium. That is, salt did not predict whether people had a bad outcome, which led to this New York Times headline that says, salt ain't so important. All right? Is that the whole story, or is there anything else? Because this is always just one study. One of the things that they didn't talk about in the New York Times article, though, that was actually in the medical article, was this other picture here. That if you looked at the whole population and you looked at the whole range of sodium that people ate, and gosh, some people are eating 10,000 milligrams of sodium. That's a heck of a lot of salt on everything.
Yeah.
That's a commitment. I'm committed to eating salt today and I won't have anything else. That you'll see that this is the line of mortality, and the higher the line is, the more the risk is. And if you look at this line, there is something about here that says anything over 3,000 milligrams per day, there probably is this signal that this is not good for your health. So just think about that. The New York Times didn't put that into their headline because that's too hard to say. It's much easier to say that salt's good. Carry on. So, what do the experts say?
Well, I'll let you talk to speak to the heart failure patients so
Yeah.
much, but so if you think about sodium intake in Canada, I mean, we can look at all those really nice numbers in the previous slide, and you know, we're talking about 1,500 to 3,000 milligrams of sodium. It's sometimes hard to see that in context. So if you think about, on average in Canada, the sodium intake is about 3,400 milligrams a day. About. Yeah. And the guidelines that we generally talk about in cardiac rehab programs like this is usually between 1,500 and 2,300. That's about right. And but it's also, again, depends. It's individual too. If you're at the 10,000 end, then we're probably going to slowly work you down, but we're not going to go from 10,000 to 3,000 in a day or anything like that. So that's when you might look at foods that are, traditionally very high in sodium, and what might those include? Pizza? What else? Campbell's soup. We'll say canned soup.
Canned soup.
We don't want to make anything else? cheese. What else is really high in sodium? Chips.
PC organic, healthy food.
Ouch. Yes, a lot of processed foods, like foods that come in a package, in a box, in a bag, things like that, generally will have a little bit more sodium than other things. So we saw the little salt shaker on the screen. I think a lot of us can agree in this room that we probably aren't using so much salt out of the shaker anymore. Is that right? A lot of you taking it off the table. Probably adding less in cooking, not so much at the table anymore. And you do know that most of the sodium in our diet's hidden, right? We don't always see that salt. And if we look at some statistics, so a little trivia to impress your friends with. If you look at the amount of sodium in our diet, about 77% of the sodium comes from processed foods and restaurant meals. 77%. That's more than 3/4 of the food that you're eating. And about 12% is going to come from the salt shaker. That's a big amount, right? So what we generally want to do is we want to look at, back to the fresh foods again, right? Looking at sort of leafy things and fresher foods, whole foods like we would call them, sort of closer to its original state, and help you look at ways to cut down a little bit. You know, a lot of what we do in cardiac rehab programs is we talk a lot about label reading, and so you can recognize ways to sort of identify if a food is high in sodium or not. There's a great website that's hosted by the Canadian Stroke Network called sodium101.ca, and they use traffic light colors to help people identify the amount of sodium in foods. A little bit easier to see it that way, and so that's a great resource to check out for things like that. And so for hidden sources, you definitely want to look at all of those things. A lot of people talk about the middle aisles in the grocery stores. That's not necessarily true, because there are a lot of really healthy things in there too. You can get, healthy cereals, and you can get, dried beans and lentils and things like that. So we won't, just circle around the outside of the grocery store, but certainly start with some label reading. Talk to a lot of grocery stores have registered dietitians on hand. You can do, or you can look at that website I mentioned, and you can look at and some of the things in your pantry cupboard. Maybe when you get home, get some ideas.
Nice. Questions, sir?
The point I wanted to make was that you get a lot of, and a lot of the anywhere, you get name, it says low
Sodium.
versus regular.
Right.
And what you got to be extremely careful, because the line goes like this, where you find the sodium actually increases significantly when they're referring to a low, when you're trying to reduce the calories. Or I would like your comments on it.
Well, I think what I'm hearing from you is when you're looking at reduced sodium foods in the grocery store, that sometimes you feel like it's a better choice, but really, based on the labeling guidelines, reduced sodium really just means 25% less sodium compared with the regular version of the same food product. So if the original product has 750 milligrams of sodium in it, which I'm going to tell you is a whole lot, 25% of that isn't necessarily within our guidelines of what we teach people to aim for. So I think it's an excellent point. I know a lot of people who think they're making great choices by choosing, the reduced sodium, where really I want people to eventually start getting to that no salt added label. And that might not be where you start from, but I want you to end up there as you slowly, gradually cut down sodium in your diet. And you'll find it takes some time, over time, but your taste buds actually adapt. You find food tastes a little bit different after you start being mindful of cutting back on maybe some foods that are a little bit higher in sodium than others. But I think you raise a great point. Reduced sodium isn't necessarily the number one answer when you're hitting the grocery store. Thank you for that.
Terrific. In the back, sir.
A bit of a marketing trend, but I guess my ultimate question is salt. What is salt? I know there's things advertised like pink Himalayan sea salt.
Oh, yeah.
Other things, is that more of a trendy thing, or is there any science to say that it's actually better?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So the question was about whether or not other salts, like pink Himalayan salt, that's like the new kale, I think,
Beautiful.
isn't it? Whether or not
Kale,
that's
quinoa, bacon, pink salt.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
delicious.
and maple syrup.
Maple syrup. Yeah.
So I think the question is whether or not this is actually, is it truly the same as regular white table salt? Is it healthier? So if you take something like sea salt, I get a lot of people asking me about sea salt, which is a bit akin to the sort of fancy pink salt too. If you look at the breakdown of sodium in regular old sort of the iodized table salt that my mother had in her cupboard for how many years, the amount of sodium in it is about sort of, I think it works out to be 40% sodium and the rest is chloride. And if you look at sea salt, do you know what the percentage of sodium is? Do you want to guess? It's not 40%, but it's pretty close. It's 39. So pink Himalayan sea salt is very similar in that regard. So it looks nice. I mean, sea salt, don't get me wrong, very different flavor than, you know, little salt like you see on the screen. But I think it's about how much you're using, how often you're using it. If it's like when people eat a food because of its purported health benefits, right? I had a lady come and see me, and she told me she would count out 11 almonds every day. And I said to her, oh, I said, do you like almonds? She said, no. And I said, why are you eating almonds? She's like, well, I read they were really good for my heart. And I said, we can find other really good things for your heart, so you don't have to choke down almonds because you read they were good for you. So I think, yeah, it's a nice idea, but it's not necessarily healthier. But it's super pretty.
Almonds are delicious. Sir?
Maybe related to that, maybe not, but I have this in my mind for a long time. Is it fair to say for someone to become a vegetarian in order to avoid all this processed food and this sodium and a lot of things that are going on, you know, with processed meat mostly?
Right.
You know, like
So am I
that-
understanding your question correctly? You're asking whether or not it's a good idea to become a vegetarian?
Yeah, because I have a lot of friends asking me with similar problems and everywhere.
Whether you should become a vegetarian?
They're thinking of doing that just to, you know, because they're
Because it's healthier?
They're confused and everything. They said it's better if I do, you know, like become.
Right, okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, it was about whether or not there's some health benefits to becoming a vegetarian for the heart? Is that what, am I hearing that
I think
correctly?
so, and that
Yeah.
it makes, yeah.
As it relates to sodium as well? Because there's a lot of processed,
You don't have to think about salt, you don't have
Yeah.
to think about sugar, you don't have to think about fat.
To be less, you know, to
Yeah.
eliminate, not to think about sodium.
right. I think it's a very interesting question as to whether or not vegetarianism sort of eliminates the worry of worrying about, you know, sodium and sugar and all these other things. And certainly we know that, and the evidence, there's reams of evidence to support that a vegetarian style way of eating can be very helpful for the heart. I mean, we can look at a number of different studies out there. And we know this is the case. So when you get a lot of your protein from plant-based sources, you eliminate those animal-based saturated fats, so that's really positive. We tend to have a higher amount of fruits and vegetables consumed, which we know, again, is very helpful for the heart. But I always say this, there are vegetarians and then there are vegetarians, right?
It
I know.
depends, I think. It does?
Right, indeed. So there are vegetarians that will eat a variety of different plant proteins, which is wonderful. There are vegetarians who also include a good amount of what I would call vegetarian processed foods. So we've all maybe seen veggie dogs, veggie burgers, veggie patties, soy-based deli meats, a lot of different options, soy cheese, things like that out there. Would you expect those to be low in sodium?
No.
And you would be correct. They are not very low in sodium. Some of them are, but many of them aren't. And so that's where it doesn't necessarily eliminate the worry of looking for sodium, but it really depends on how you tackle a transition into a vegetarian style way of eating. And that's usually where, you know, talking to a dietitian can probably help you determine how you want to do that, if in fact that's something you feel very strongly about doing. Absolutely right.
Great, thank you. Last question, Linda.
Do you know anything about the Bill Clinton diet?
The paleo diet?
I think
Well, he did
was in
South
Or- he
Beach,
was South
and
Beach,
then he did
Orange.
paleo. Was it Orange too? Oh gosh, he's done a few of them.
He is so pure vegetarian because he said his heart is like a rotten pear. And he has to be so careful that it's all, and this is, I don't know if he practices, but this is what he was saying, that everything he eats is fresh, unprocessed.
Oh, I think I know now. Yeah.
Yeah, he is so extreme natural, and it has done him well. He has a very productive life.
Right.
Whereas before, he did have open heart surgery,
Mhm.
and he was obese at one time and had a lot of issues. But it seems that his form of the extreme vegetarian diet has helped him immensely.
Okay, so the question was surrounding Bill Clinton, who we're probably very well aware had a heart attack and really drastically changed his eating habits after that. And it just clicked in my head that what he's adopted, it wasn't actually Ornish, it was based on Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn and Dr. Colin Campbell. So Colin Campbell wrote a book you may have heard of called The China Study. And Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's written a book called Reversing Heart Disease. And what both these books are based on is whole food plant-based diets. Whole food plant-based diets are quite strict. They don't like to call them vegan diets, but that's what they essentially are, with the exception that they don't include any oils in their diet, which is very, very different from what we tend to teach, which is more of a Mediterranean style way of eating. I don't like to use the word diet because I don't really like diets, but it's more of a pattern of eating. And so that's what he's done. A lot of people do very well on it. They've had a number of very small studies, like I think the subjects are between sort of 6 and 15, some of their studies, a little bit older now, some of the studies, and a lot of them are sort of case control, so maybe not the gold standard of, studies that we like to sort of really look at for cause and effect. So we can't say, this caused this, but certainly the results they've shown are fairly compelling in terms of, changes in people's blood work and things like that. But it does entail a pretty significant commitment on the part of people to adopt something like this. A lot of people in a cardiac rehab setting, highly motivated, right? We just got pretty scared. I don't want to be doing this again. We don't like frequent flyers here. That's basically what we try to say. So we want, people to be able to make changes to behaviors, to their lifestyle that are realistic, that make sense. So in the long run, it's sustainable for you. Whether it's eating, exercise, coffee, bacon, quinoa, whatever.
Delicious.
So that's really what he took with. But I'm happy to talk with people afterwards if they want more information
Terrific.
about that. Yeah.
Thank you for that discussion. It actually leads well into the next parts of this, which I'll fly through fairly quickly to get us kind of on time. But it links exactly with the discussion that just happened. And this headline from a website just a month ago talked about a healthy eating plan that could cut the heart disease risk. And it was hailed as the best healthy eating regimen ever, called the Portfolio Eating Plan. And it actually links very well with the discussion that we just had.
Indeed.
And what's wonderful about this headline is this is a Toronto-born initiative by Dr. Jenkins' lab from St. Michael's. This was a secondary analysis of 241 people who had high cholesterol, and half of them were receiving, or a third of them were receiving this diet that's called DASH diet. Who's heard of a DASH diet? That bet it should be everybody in this room, frankly, because you've all heard about it in the program as really kind of a healthy, plant-based, largely kind of program that helps lower blood pressure. And then their version of that stepped it up a couple notches, that includes soy protein and lots of fibers and lots of nuts. And here was their simple sort of diagram that they showed, that compared to a really good diet, the DASH diet, the Portfolio diet over 24 weeks was able to lower blood pressure even more. It's not a lot, but it was a little bit more. And the homage to this diet is kale and soy nuts and lots of fiber.
Right.
So that there is probably this consistent pattern across a whole bunch of studies that talks to healthier patterns of eating. Sam, do you want to talk to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really translates nicely from what we were talking about before, and I alluded to what I tend to talk about, and I know a lot of the dietitians at this site talk a lot about Mediterranean style way of eating. You can see diets are in kind of quotations. And the Mediterranean diet, I mean, if you look at the evidence for Mediterranean style way of eating, I mean, it's pretty compelling evidence. I mean, if you look back to what we call the Lyon Diet Heart Study back in 1999, and you look at the PREDIMED study, which was done in Spain, which was done in 2013, around there, the really emphasis is on lots of fruits and vegetables, high fiber grains, nuts every day, so about a handful of nuts every day. They talked a lot about olive oil. The Lyon Diet Heart Study actually used more canola oil based, but both of them were considered good. Very low animal fat in terms of saturated fat, lower in sodium certainly, about 2 to 3 servings of fish a week in the Mediterranean style diet, and the emphasis was on less red meat overall, less processed meat overall. And if you look at that compared to a portfolio diet, the portfolio diet really highlights soluble fiber specifically, so think of things like oats and things like that, psyllium fiber that you might find in some breakfast cereals and things like that, and overall a very high fiber diet generally, where soluble fiber makes up almost half of that, which is quite significant, but they really emphasize nuts, a good amount of nuts. Again, they emphasize heart healthy fats as always, low sodium, but it's essentially a vegetarian diet, right? So the emphasis is on soy for protein, and soy can come in a number of different forms. It could come in, you know, as tofu, as, you know, soy cheese and other things like that, soy nuts as we saw earlier, things like that. And that's really, and they do emphasize things like plant sterols also. So you get plant sterols when you eat plants, but you can also buy things like margarines that have plant sterols added to it. It's the really expensive one. It's a smaller one, but there are some, you know, pretty meaningful studies looking at potential benefits with plant sterols. So, and that's really, if you compare it with DASH, DASH is very similar to Mediterranean in a lot of, you can see the check marks kind of line up. They do emphasize a little bit more in the soy as well, more so than the Mediterranean, but yeah, you can get an idea by sort of looking at this graph how you can see the similarities, but you can see maybe where the emphasis is also in terms of, you know, what it can provide.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to hold your questions, but you'll have those opportunities to interact afterwards. We don't want to hold you up too far from your holiday party, but to get you into the mood for the holiday party. So is there a heart-healthy diet, not in quotation marks, but there is no best, right?
There's not really a
there's these
best.
patterns, but if you started with the things that are on the screen, you're doing pretty darn
Yeah.
well. Put whatever you want with it, but start there. Okay, last thought for the holidays is, what about this thought-provoking headline from the Huffington Post from last week? Coffee drinkers are healthier and less likely to die from heart disease. Oh my God, I want some of that. And this was based on an analysis, gosh, from 200,000 people whose coffee patterns were looked at with almost 5 million years of follow-up. That's a big experience to draw from. And this complex graph would suggest that there is a complex relationship between coffee consumption and whether you die. First of all, it was really important to look at people in the whole population where you would say, so coffee seems to be good at a level of about 2 or 3 drinks per day, but then if you drank more coffee, it seemed like you died more. The complicating thing, of course, is people that drink a lot of coffee tend to smoke a lot as well. The two go hand in hand, literally. So important to pull out the smokers, right? So if you take non-smokers and look at what happens to them, it seems that if you drink 1 coffee a day, 2, 3, 4, 5, you actually get healthier and healthier. Gosh, I should have 10 and I'll live forever is the notion. And that's true for caffeinated coffee. It's also true for decaf coffee as well, which I haven't shown you here. So it looked like coffee is really, really good. So I asked the questions, because I stopped drinking coffee. Am I doing something bad? I can feel my heart squeezing right now. Is it possible to actually drink too much And the answer is probably, how about those double doubles? Is that actually a good way to get all my calories in a single cup? Is that delicious or what? And what about the tea or the cola? Maybe these are questions that you're just going to have to ponder, Rob. Or should we ask for the commentary for 2 minutes and then we'll wrap it up?
Okay, we'll keep it short and sweet. So if you drink coffee already, you can continue to enjoy it. I don't want you to drink more than 3 cups a day. And when I mean cups, I'm not talking like the large tins. We're talking the small, which is now what, the extra small or something? But 250 mils is considered one cup. And so Health Canada guidelines, when it comes to caffeine, because that's what we're looking at really, is 400 milligrams of caffeine a day. What the heck does that mean? It's about equivalent to sort of about 3 cups a day. 3 cups, not 3 cups. Can you drink too much? Of course you can. You'll probably feel it first, like you said, get the jitters and the heart palpitations. And definitely when it comes to coffee, it's not just about the caffeine, it's certainly about what goes in your coffee. So the double doubles, yeah, so if you're doing double cream, double sugar, and you're doing that several times a day, every day, times 7 days, or more on the weekends, it's going to add up, right? And so I don't get too fussed about, a little bit of cream or a little bit of, whole milk or something in a coffee, but when you look at the accumulation of it, you can see the impact over time, and that's what we're looking at. So when we talk about decreasing something like cream or sugar in the coffee, stepwise process. So if you're starting at cream, go to light cream or half and half. If you're at half and half, go to light half and half. If you're at light half and half, go to whole milk. You get the idea. Same thing with something like sugar. See if you can get away with a little bit less. Don't try the maple syrup idea. Might not work. In terms of caffeine amount, it's something like tea. Tea is generally a little bit lower in caffeine than regular brewed coffee. Instant coffee is a little bit lower in caffeine than brewed coffee. Espresso, surprisingly for a lot of people, is lowest in caffeine because caffeine is water soluble. So the more water you have, the more caffeine gets dispersed, and so that's why you get higher amounts of it. And so things like cola, yes, you're going to get a certain amount of caffeine in cola. I can give you the exact amount. So up to not quite 50 milligrams of caffeine in a can of cola. When you compare that with, your small Tim's coffee, which is about 140 milligrams, you can see the difference there. So that's about it, I guess, for the commentary in terms of that.
Terrific. Well, for our audience in Videoland, why don't we take this opportunity to thank everybody in the room for sitting in and for participating. We will take some more questions later, so hold on there. I want to thank, on behalf of you and Toronto Rehab, Samantha, for coming all the way from Oakville to Toronto in frightening traffic along Eglinton Avenue. They feel your pain.
Told me this.
They feel your pain, and that was a wonderful session, I think.
Great.
So thank you, and I know there's going to be a whole bunch more questions. So thank you, and on your behalf, nice round of applause. Thank you.